Now, from the station that's on your side, this is News 19 WLTX.
And good evening. Welcome to our information center. As you can see, we are joined tonight by the governor of the state of South Carolina, Mark Sanford, and all of this controversy surrounding stimulus funds. We're going to just cut through the chase right out of the gate. Governor, are you going to be accepting those stimulus funds over the next 2 years to the tune of $700 million?
We said from the very beginning we would very much like to. The question, I guess, now remains to be seen is what will Senate and House budget writers do.
So that's not a yes and it's not a no right now.
It's a no if they won't allocate any to paying down debt. It's a yes if they will allocate to paying down debt.
We want to share with our viewers at home just exactly what we're talking about here. If you've been out of town, if you haven't really kept up with the amount of money that South Carolina is slated to receive, we have some numbers for you. The total stimulus package nationwide is about $787 billion. South Carolina allocated to receive roughly around $8 billion in funds and in tax credits, tax breaks, I should say, with the governor here controlling about $700 million over the next 2 years or so. And there's been a lot of political opposition over your stance on this stimulus money, including Hugh Leatherman with the Senate Finance Committee. He continues to say that we actually need to accept that money. He says the stimulus money is crucial to this state to provide service to our people, keep teachers from being fired, and to not open prison doors to let prisoners out early. He is urging you to reconsider tonight to bring the money to our people. He is the only person, you, the governor, who can accept the money. He goes on to say that if you do not take it, it goes to other states, and we really need to take that money. Also, Senator Lindsey Graham has admitted to voting against the stimulus bill. At the same time, he's saying that we just can't refuse to accept the money because we got to pay it back. So based on that dilemma, he believes it's in South Carolina's best interest to apply for the funds. He says they will do some good. Your reaction to both of those comments?
Well, I think, first of all, you need to put the context as to where the overall numbers are. Last year in South Carolina, we spent $19 billion all in. This coming year, we will spend $21 billion. That's an 11% increase, and not at all fitting with the doomsday scenario that Senator Leatherman suggests. Even in education, last year we spent $3.3 billion. This year, that number will rise to $3.5 billion, and that's without the stimulus money. And so that's a 4% increase. So it's at odds with what Senator Leatherman and others are suggesting because they left out $500 million that the House had in its budget, and you know, it's totally unrealistic to think that that $500 million that they've left out of this budget to scare people won't at the end of the day be spent.
But Senator Leatherman says the numbers coming out of his committee are accurate. He's saying that the numbers that he's presented are accurate. And
he would acknowledge the fact that he's not including the $500 million. And if passed as any prologue, in every other budget year over the 6 years that I've been governor, when that kind of money has been on the table, he's spent it every single time.
Let's talk about the deadline, because there's some confusion over that today. I believe at an afternoon news conference it was alluded to that you had a couple of years to accept this money, but we have heard from the White House today, and they are clearly saying that you have until tomorrow to accept that money. Also, according to the White House, you have to actually, the certification by tomorrow's deadline is a requirement for you to be able to apply for money from the state stabilization fund down the road. So are you confused on the deadline? Is it tomorrow?
I think that there are a lot of different claims and counterclaims, but what we've been saying for the last couple of weeks is that we're going to accept 90% of the money in stimulus coming to the state of South Carolina. The debate all along has been about the last 10%, the $700 million. And it's our belief that if you won the lottery and you were a prudent individual, you wouldn't spend all the money. You'd put some money aside to paying down the mortgage or paying off credit cards, and that our state shouldn't be any different, particularly when we're fourth in the United States of America in what we allocate to, in fact, paying down debt. And those debt numbers that we pay don't go to paying for school teachers or for health care in South Carolina. They go to bondholders, whether in New York or places like Switzerland. And so what we've said is we'll be stronger in this financial storm if it lasts more than 24 months by taking a small portion. We're talking about 10% of the total of stimulus to paying down debt. And that's why we've said it's in the budget writers' hands over on the Senate side. If they will do it, we'll sign off tomorrow. If they won't, we won't.
It's your belief as governor, though, that you should have control over that $700 million?
Well, that's what the Attorney General has said. That's what the White House itself has said.
Well, they say that you're the only one that can accept it, but you believe that you're the only one that can decide where the money should be spent.
Well, again, that's what they have validated, if you will, that opinion that we've held for more than a month. We laid that claim from early on. We said this is the part of the package that we're going to focus on, because this is the part that we think, and again, the Attorney General supported this notion that we get to direct.
Again, there is opposition to all of this tonight from members of your own party. Again, the Speaker of the House, Bobby Harrell, saying today we are at the 11th hour of this debate. He says it is time for the nonsense to stop, and for you, the governor, to request the funds our citizens will have to pay back anyway. The lieutenant governor also releasing a statement.
But can I interject?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Is there nonsense? We don't have a giant piggy bank in Washington, D.C. The money, the overall stimulus package is coming from is going to be borrowed, which means my 4 boys, Marshall, Landon, Bolton, and Blake, are going to be paying it off, and your kids and grandkids are going to be paying it off. And so does it really make any sense on a stimulus package that's being created by debt to go out and just spend it all, because it means we're basically spending all the money now on government services and we're leaving our kids and our grandkids in paying the bill? And what we said is there's a component of fairness here, which is if we're going to borrow that money, we ought to, in fact, then pay down some borrowing so that those kids and those grandkids get some of the benefit of this stimulus package rather than just the bill.
We're going to get the taxation on that coming up in a few moments. I want to just a couple of more quick statements. The lieutenant governor also chiming in on this today. Of course, he says that he may be running for governor as well. He also says while he admires your stance on this ridiculous spending in Washington, as he calls it, the debate is over. The issue at hand is whether or not to accept the money. He believes you should go ahead and do it. And, of course, Jim Clyburn, the Democrat, the House Majority Whip, very outspoken and a big critic of yours when it comes to this. Clyburn says that much-needed aid is being denied the children of South Carolina. He goes on to say that if you do not act by tomorrow to accept the funds, our state stands to lose more than 2/3 of the education funding allocated in the bill. Any comments on Jim Clyburn? Because, again, he has been one of the most outspoken critics when it comes to you and the stimulus money.
No, I understood. The difference of opinion makes the world go round. But I keep going back to a fairly basic principle. If you won the lottery tomorrow, would you be prudent in your finances if you spent every dime? And what this lottery, what this stimulus bill represents is sort of the lottery of all lotteries for state budgets, because it's about equal to what we spend in a whole year. And what we said is, no, a prudently managed household or business wouldn't do that. Well, why should government do that, particularly if we're where we are? You know, Senator Ryberg stood up at the press conference today and pointed out the fact that we have a $20 billion unfunded set of political promises on the retirement and health care side. If you look at the top 125 pension funds in the United States of America, South Carolina ranks 106 as in toward the worst in actual funding. We're less than 70% funded on the retirement promises that we made to folks across the state. And so given that fact that you've gotten a windfall, wouldn't it make sense to shore up some of those political promises that are not funded, particularly in these economic times? Because if this storm lasts more than 24 months, what everybody forgets is if we just spend it all, we end up $740 million in the hole. And then who gets us out? But what do we do then?
But help us
How do we get out of that $740 million hole? And so the easiest of all things for me would be to say, tell you what, I'm done with this office in 18 months. My term comes to an end. It's somebody else's problem. Let them deal with it in 24 months. But I don't think I'd be acting as a fiduciary if I just left somebody with a $740 million bill.
Well, help us understand something tonight, because it seems to me that people who run the state agencies, the state education department, for instance, Jim Rex saying today, we stand to lose thousands of education jobs if you do not accept this stimulus money. And just yesterday, you had education jobs if you do not accept the stimulus money. And just yesterday you had to see the sea of people outside the State House. We had video of that. More than 1,000 people outside the State House yesterday. The majority of those people, educators, very upset about you not accepting this money.
And what I'd say is, look, I'd be marching there with them, and I completely understand where they're coming from.
Well,
if I was reacting to that so-called chaos budget that Senator Leatherman created to scare people into causing me to change my opinion. Well, I mean, I don't blame them. I'd be frightened too. And the numbers that are coming out on Rex's side are based, again, on that Senate finance budget that is a chaos budget that leaves over $550 million out of the equation, which is not an accurate budget. And a whole host of senators stood up and said that very thing today.
Well, those educators are just frightened to death. They're going to be losing their jobs. And my question to you tonight, can you sit here tonight and say to these teachers, you are not going to lose your job come the next school year?
I can say, based on the budget that we did, the executive branch budget, that's absolutely the case. I can say on the House budget that was created, you didn't see people marching after our budget or after the House budget was created. The only time you've seen those marches is after the so-called chaos budget was created, and indeed it's created chaos. So you've had two things go on. You had the Democratic National Committee come in and run thousands of ads across this state trying to scare people into getting them to put political pressure on me to change my mind. Then you had a chaos budget that was created to try to scare people to get them to put pressure on me to change my mind. But I keep going back to the reality, which is, look at the overall numbers, and they don't fit with chaos. Last year in South Carolina, we spent $19 billion. This coming year, we're going to spend $21 billion. Does that fit with laying off thousands of teachers? But I'm asking you, do you think that that fits if you're going to go up overall by 11%?
As far as the educators, though, are concerned.
No, but I'm asking, does that fit?
Well, that's to be debated, I guess. But when it
is being debated.
When it comes to the educators, though, Governor, again, could you tell them tonight, if you do not accept the stimulus money, if you do not accept it, that they will not lose their jobs?
I'll go back to what I said just a moment ago. Based on the budget we created, and based on the budget the House created, that is the case. Based on the chaos budget, absolutely not. But that's where this is really a debate about priorities. I mean, think about GM as an example. What we were told with General Motors was, give us all these billions of dollars and we'll make reforms and we'll become more competitive. They took the billions, they didn't become competitive, and now the President of the United States has come in and fired the chairman of GM, and now the number 2 guy says, we'll make the reforms, we'll make the reforms. At the end of the day, what we're really talking about here is a set of priorities of, do we just take all this money and not make reforms that at the end of the day will make South Carolina more competitive in producing jobs and having a better economy, because that's the easier route, or do we make some of those reforms that involve tough choices? And what we're saying is, we can make some tough choices that have been long overdue in many cases and have money for education, health care, and a whole host of other needs, and avoid a $740 million hole 24 months from now.
Some of our state's best and brightest minds are saying, by not taking the money, we are going to be in a down spiral. For instance, the state education superintendent, Jim Rex, today, he held a press conference to say, again, those 5,000 jobs will be eliminated. Might be able to save half of those jobs if you request the stimulus funds. And I believe we have some sound from that press conference, if we can take a listen to it.
It's as desperate as anything I've seen in many, many years, because we are quickly approaching the end of the school year, where decisions have to be made about next year, the beginning of next school year, and especially personnel decisions about who you can rehire. And so we have very little time to make these decisions.
All right, so Jim Rex, they're basically saying they're at a crossroads. They are at a point where they have to start making decisions for the next school year, and it's uncertain right now with the state education department, according to our state's education superintendent.
And again, he's basing that on the numbers in the chaos budget, and so there is uncertainty. We don't know which budget will finally make its way through the political system, and that's why I'd ask people to pick up the phone and say, you know, to the folks in the Senate side, wait a minute, we're going to spend 90% of the stimulus and we can't pay just 10% down to get our financial ship of state in a bit better order? You know, does it really make sense to leave out this $550 million that the Senate finance budget is leaving out? I mean, I think there's some real questions that need to be asked of Senate budget writers that rightfully scare Jim Rex or, frankly, other people across this state.
All right, we have an educator that we actually talked to today, someone who teaches in the classroom, and she has a question for the governor tonight.
Governor Sanford, what we're trying to figure out is, in this time of economic hardship, when people are losing their homes and teachers are working harder than they ever have, with all of the lack of resources that we have, how is it justifiable for teachers to have lost and schools to have lost so much money from districts that can help students and ultimately give teachers jobs?
Obviously, that is a male teacher in the classrooms. My apologies, but his question to you, what's your response?
I couldn't hear all of it, but would you just paraphrase?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He basically said in this time of hardship when people are losing their homes and teachers are working harder than they ever had with all the lack of resources that we have, how is it justifiable for teachers to have lost and schools to have lost so much money from districts that can help students and ultimately give teachers jobs?
Well, I keep going back to the priority question. I mean, in our budget, for instance, we cut money from the State Department of Education because our belief was that the front line of what happens in any educational process is with the teacher and in the classroom. And yet an amazing amount of money gets spent in administration or in central headquarters that doesn't go ultimately to producing a better product for that child in the classroom. So to a degree, it's a question of priorities there. And to a degree, it's a question of priorities between education and other things. What we have said, I'll use an example. The Terry program was created years ago to basically reward meritorious teachers like that gentleman or other folks. A court decision said no, it's going to apply to every state worker. Everybody has acknowledged for years the fact that the Terry program doesn't work and it costs a whole lot of money. It doesn't produce its intended consequence, and yet nobody will touch it. It's in these kinds of economic times that you could make a reform to the Terry program that would save $19 million in this budget year alone that could go to teachers in the classroom, and yet what people are saying is no, we don't want to make those kinds of reforms. Well, I keep going back to the competitiveness issue. If we're not going to look in these kinds of budget times under the hood at a whole host of things that have been outdated, I mean, we're the only state in the country that does things as we do with the Budget Control Board, a long list of things, then I don't know when we're ever going to do it. And this is particularly important given the fact that in 24 months, if we do nothing, we're right back to where we are right now with a $740 million hole, a much bigger hole than we're dealing with right now.
One more issue on education. We got an email from a viewer, Brian, and he has this to say about education. He wants to know, why do you regularly use public education as a political bargaining chip? He says you have a clear agenda to push school choice and vouchers, and while he respects your position, he's appalled at your willingness to hinder public education to further your goals.
Well, I think we all got the same goal, which is how do you have a first-rate educational system in South Carolina, in this country, so that we can compete with the likes of China and India, other places around the globe. We may legitimately see different ways of getting there. I believe that God makes every child different, and that there ought to be a multitude of different choices that fit with the diversity of different kids that are out there. And I don't think that at the end of the day, and data supports this, that is harmful to public education. Other people disagree with me. And so whether you're pro or con on the notion of choice in education, and I'm decidedly pro, every one of the numbers we talked about with regard to the stimulus package doesn't touch it. There is no debate on public versus private school choice within these stimulus funds.
All right, from public education to public safety now. Your hand-picked SLED director, Reggie Lloyd, just this afternoon said without these stimulus dollars, it's going to be like public safety Armageddon out there. He says that prisons are going to have to release inmates early. He won't have the manpower to do the job that he needs to do. Is Reggie Lloyd, the SLED director tonight, also misinterpreting the numbers in your opinion, or does he see something down there, and has he approached you about it?
We talked to him this afternoon, and what he says is his numbers were based on the Finance Committee chaos budget. He didn't react that way after the executive branch produced its budget. He didn't react that way after the House produced its budget. His numbers were very much aimed simply at that chaos budget. I mean, there's so much confusion out there, and rightfully a lot of people are frightened across South Carolina based on that chaos budget that has a lot of people churned up because it just so happened to leave off $550 million of federal funds that will be spent in South Carolina.
Unemployment.
Leave off $550 million of federal funds that will be spent in South Carolina.
Unemployment. We have the second highest unemployment rate in the country at 11%. Under your plan, as far as the stimulus money is concerned, how do we create new jobs in South Carolina?
One, the old-fashioned way, in terms of trying to become as competitive as possible in the playing field that we offer to businesses small and large in our state, and that's why it was important. I think that we cut the marginal rate for small businesses for the first time in South Carolina history, because we used to tax a little business struggling to make it at 7% and a large corporation at 5%. That's why it's important that we enacted workers' comp reform or tort reform or a long list of other things. So soil conditions are a part of it. And then we're regularly about the business of trying to tell the South Carolina story. I had a Korean firm in the office this week that is looking at investment up on the I-85 corridor that would be a great job producer. You may have seen the announcement just a couple of weeks ago about the company that will come to Barnwell, South Carolina, and in the long run produce over 1,000 jobs in a part of South Carolina that very much needs them. So I think we're also about the business of trying to attract jobs and capital to our state for the way that that ultimately produces jobs.
So when you've got so many people out of work in this state right now, and they're standing in unemployment lines and they're trying to get jobs left and right, and then they hear, and be it correct information or not, that, hey, we're not getting this money and things are doom and gloom, you have to be concerned because they're concerned about their futures and their family's welfare.
Sure. But let's not fall to the hypothesis that says, look, if we just go out and spend unlimited tolls of federal money, mind you, money that we don't have, we go out and print money and we borrow money to solve a problem that was created by too much debt, then that's the way to solve the economy. Because if that was the case, and I've been criticized for this comment, that Zimbabwe would be a rich place. The fact is, printing money that you don't have in the history of economics has never really proved to work all that well. And the verdict is still out on the $13 trillion of stimulus that's come into our system over the last year as to whether it's working. And the verdict is still out on whether or not the $8 billion that will be spent in South Carolina will in fact work. And that's why I think it's so important to do what our grandmother said on this whole notion of moderation in all things, of saying, okay, it may or may not work. But wouldn't it make sense, if it doesn't work, to take 10% of that total to pay down debt so that our finances are in stronger order, so that if it doesn't work, and if this storm is still raging 24 months from now, we're in a stronger financial position to spend more, to issue more debt, to do a whole host of things that would help people here at the state level. You understand that the citizens of the state are frightened, they're scared. Absolutely. They're just uncertain about their futures and what's down the road. I understand that is the case with, again, many people across South Carolina, and I empathize for them, and I empathize for their families. But, my job as a chief executive is to look at the numbers and to make decisions that I think will be in the best interest of those families over the long run. Probably the worst decisions we make in life are about the next 5 minutes. Probably some of the best decisions we make in our life are about the next 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years. And what we're looking at is a longer-term perspective over the next 24 months, not the next 2 weeks, but the next 24 months, in what will put South Carolina in a stronger position. And I've come to believe very strongly that a little bit of moderation, 10% of the total going to pay down debt, will help to get us there. All right, let's get back to taxation real quick. I know I'm running over on our allotted time tonight, but this is a very important issue. You heard from, I believe, Andre Bauer earlier, and you heard from Lindsey Graham earlier saying, hey, we're going to be taxed anyway. We've got to pay the money back anyway, so why not take it? If we've got to pay the money back, why not just go ahead and take it? Again, we have consistently said, let's take it. The only question is, how does it get allocated? And that's where the tug of war has been. Do you just spend it all, or do you put some of it to paying down debt? And again, keep in mind what I said earlier, which is there is an equity component here in terms of fairness to the next generation. Because there is not that giant piggy bank in Washington, D.C., because money is going to be borrowed to issue these checks, then it's the next generation that pays. So why wouldn't it make sense to spend most of it, but to pay down a little debt so that those kids who are going to pay the tab on this thing, we're not going to pay the tab, those kids are going to pay the tab on it, so they get a little benefit too. Do you feel like the president's tying your hands on this? I think he certainly attempted to, which is why, the Democratic National Committee came in before they had even come back with a response to our original waiver request and began to run thousands of ads across South Carolina saying this is the way you need to go. I respect him, but I've been disappointed in that approach to politics because it's hardly the Socratic process of kicking ideas back and forth.
I know a number of polls over the last few days have showed, I checked one today, I believe, on the state website today, 72% out there of the people who took part in the survey say you should take the money, but not everybody is against you on the subject. Tommy Johnson wrote into us today saying that many times I do not agree with your method of handling issues, but I respect your stance on this one. And Megan Burton also wrote in to tell us, Governor Sanford, I just want to say that I appreciate all that you do for our state. I am very pleased and thankful for your decision. Thank you, and keep up the good work. So again, there are some people out there who are on your side on this issue, but it just seems from state agency heads to people in your own party, they just don't understand. They don't know what's going on here. They don't know why you're doing this.
Well, the natural course of actions in any political world is if you throw a bunch of dollars on the table, people grab their share and move it quickly. There are a lot of questions asked. There's not a lot of analysis. My job as a chief executive is to very carefully analyze the implications of grabbing all those dollars and spending them, or in some cases investing them, as we would with paying down debt. And there is a silent majority. I mean, I went and spoke down at the Rotary Club Rotary Club yesterday in Mount Pleasant. And afterward, a long number of different folks came up and said, keep on, I appreciate what you're doing, sort of in fitting with those last two folks that you just read from. And so I think there's a silent majority of folks out there who are busy getting themselves to and from work, or getting the kids to and from soccer practice, who may not be engaged in the political process. They may not be an agency head or sort of plugged in on some want that they need from government, but who very much agree with where we're coming from because of its common sense nature. And the common sense nature is a little bit of moderation in all things. 90% going towards stimulus, but 10% going to pay down debt at the end of the day would not put our state in a worse position, may well put our state in a better position.
We have one final comment from a viewer who believes that what you're doing is political posturing, perhaps running for a higher office. Take a listen.
Governor Sanford, when are you going to put the people and the children of South Carolina before your own political interests?
Obviously, she believes that you might be running for a higher office someday. Your response to that?
I'd say, with all due respect, give me a break. I mean, if I wanted to run for higher office, why in the world would you do something that upsets so many people? I mean, why in the world would you do something that caused, many editorial boards across the state to editorialize against you? I mean, this is one of those that I get it that it's not necessarily a currently in the moment popular decision. But I keep going back to the 5-minute rule versus the 5 or 10 or 15-year rule. This is one of those decisions that I think over the long run will be viewed very, very positively, even if it's not in the short run.
Well, Governor, we are out of time.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for a lively discussion tonight.
Pleasure.
And, of course, we have much more of this on our website. Simply go to WLTX.com and be sure to join us again tonight at 11.